Go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the work session for the City of Evans for March 2nd. First item on the agenda is the COVID-19 response. We'll hear from staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. Tonight, I'm pleased to let you know that our trends continue favorably, both in Evans and for the region. You see, as we use our normal metrics and slides here, you can see the overall, this is for Colorado. The trend is still generally on its way down. There was a little uptick this past week, but nothing that disrupts our downward trend of new cases. When we zoom in on Weld County, you can see kind of a similar general downward trend. You can see that, like state, we had a little bit of an uptick last week. We're in the 400 new cases range. This is still the level that we had approximately where we were before last October, before the sharp increase that we saw in November and December. So still fairly favorable. However, you'll see on the next slide probably a very bottom line metric for us. The heavier blue line is the fatalities in Weld County. You can see that those do continue to rise at a fairly steady pace, despite the trend shown by the lighter blue line for the hospitalizations. Those do continue on their downward trend. So that's good that we're seeing fewer severe cases, but those severe cases do appear to be very severe. This shows our change over the prior period for those major metrics kept by the state. That's positivity rates, cases per 100,000 over the past 2 weeks, and new hospital admissions per day. And this slide actually shows the time period through the 1st of November. We're keeping this data just to show the overall trend, which is certainly downward. But it gets even better on the next slide when you look at what's happened during February over the last 2 week periods, where you can see that our positivity rates is down even a little further than it was at our last meeting. We're just over 5%, which puts us in the yellow. And then you can see that for cases per 100,000, we're at 458. And the new hospital admissions is still around 1. So those do continue to decline as our weeks go, which is good news. So the operational update, of course, our goals have not changed. Our services have generally not changed, although I'd mentioned some bright news in recreation. You know, our philosophy or approach has been to enable our community to be as active and engaged with our recreation center as those state laws allow. And with some of the changes over the past couple weeks, we've been able to start to book more events here at the community complex, which is good. And we've also had, I understand we had about 75 kids playing basketball in our gym, which was really great to see those teams, and we're starting to get some of those games going. I'm also pleased to let you know that within the past hour or so, we were informed that the state has changed our 5-star business program profile or level on the dial to blue. So while our county is in that yellow or still some risk, we've now been moved for purposes of the 5-star program, which was the goal, that under 5-star our businesses could operate confidently at a level up on the dial. That has been moved to blue based on those trends that we just saw a minute ago. So under blue, the capacity for restaurants, for instance, or for event facilities stays at 50%, which is where it has been, but the facility size sensitive number goes from 50 to 175 under blue. So some of our larger facilities, like the Moose Lodge, for instance, which is a participant in the five-star program, now has a maximum capacity of either 50% or 175. So presumably for larger facilities, that gives them more capacity to operate, again, as we've said, confidently. Our businesses are making the best choices for them, but those who have chosen the five-star program can take advantage of that. So that concludes. I always want to point out at the end, we had only 3 employees out with symptoms or precautionary quarantine due to COVID. While we wish that number was 0, that's still very manageable, and that's good news for us too. That concludes my presentation, Mayor. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Questions of staff on COVID? Fred?
Well, that's pretty much what one of the restaurant owners I spoke with today said. It wouldn't help them very much because of the spacing requirements. So they really couldn't go from 50 people to 100 because of the spacing requirements in their restaurant. So.
Yeah, it's still hard if you don't have the space. I've heard that's a familiar theme.
Other comments or questions on COVID? Thank you, Jim. Next up on the agenda is the primary industry overview, Upstate Colorado Economic Development. Turn it back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. And as I introduce, I'll ask Allison Moding and Rich Werner from Upstate Colorado to join me. We've been spending a lot of time, I know Council's been talking a lot about economic development, and an important part of our economic development discussions and planning is on the commercial industrial side of the house, even though we've been talking a lot about retail. I certainly heard from the Council coming out of your retreat that you're certainly wanting us to redouble our efforts on those other sectors like our other commercial sectors in town, and we are certainly doing that. So tonight we want to give you an update on our commercial and industrial development efforts and where we are with some of those, what some of our focus areas are. And Allison will kind of give that update. And then we're thankful, I'll say thanks to Rich Werner for being with us. The city has been a member of Upstate Colorado Economic Development Corporation for a number of years, and they really are our partner in terms of recruitment for larger primary employment companies and other commercial and industrial uses. That's kind of a major role for them, but they're also just really good consultants and partners and advisors to us on broader economic development issues. They're plugged in regionally, first of all, and then also nationally. And I know Rich will talk a little bit more about what they do and how they work with us, and then some regional trends, and then some of the things that they're seeing for Evans, that Evans might be particularly primed for, and some of those things that are going other places in the county. So we've asked them to share information on all of those fronts. And we want to leave a couple minutes for your questions for Rich and for us as well. So with that intro, I will turn it over to Allison for a little overview of where Evans is in our efforts on commercial development.
Thank you. So as Jim said, industrial recruitment is really just kind of one piece of the puzzle when we're looking at our overall economic development efforts. I'd say that probably about 10% of my time is maybe spent on that recruitment of those primary employers, and it's kind of up and down. There are weeks where we get 3 or 4 requests for information.
And you're spending more than 100% of your time.
And then it's like more than 100% of your time. So it's one of those kind of unpredictable things, but I think it's certainly an important part of what we do. Rich will talk a little bit more about what primary employment is, but I like to just think of it as bringing new money into the community. A lot of our businesses kind of, in a sense, recycle money. We trade money back and forth, but it's really that new money coming into the community that's important. And so I think, we want to have more of that business. Obviously, we want to have our residents be able to work in the community where they live. I think that's an asset, and I know we've heard recently that we have a lot of commuters, right? A lot of our residents go outside of Evans to work, and so wouldn't it be great to have more companies that are able to provide employment right here at home? So, we talk about those requests for information. We get that opportunity, either the state, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, or through Rich's organization, will send us an RFI from a site selector who represents these companies that are looking for new locations. And as you can imagine, everyone wants these, right? These are definitely businesses they're in demand, and they know it. So they send us long lists of things that say we need 50 acres and we need this kind of workforce and we want this kind of incentive, and they get very detailed as to what their water requirements are. They'll talk about their power requirements for their facility, wastewater needs, all those sorts of things. So so it's important for us to know up front, I think, and talk about what those what are our strengths? Where are our locations? And we did bring, I did bring up a little map here that shows the properties that we have in Evans that are zoned for industrial use. They're all south of 37th Street and east of 23rd Avenue. So you all, I'm sure, are familiar with all of these. The Platt Industrial Center is along Carson Avenue, and the PDC Energy building is back there. There are a lot of smaller warehouse type businesses back there that hold smaller type businesses. We've got the Evans Industrial Center, which is really what we refer to as the industrial park. And then just to the west of that, I guess I could use my little clicker here, right? No, I can't. There we go. Stonegate. About 25 acres there that's platted for industrial use. If you're wondering, this little piece right up there is the city's operations complex. And then, Julie, could you go to the next slide? And then our newest industrial park is the Mountain Tracks facility there on the left. That's a 226-acre parcel, rail served, which is somewhat unique, I think, in the area. And they have new ownership that is motivated, I think, to find tenants for that site. And we've been pretty active in trying to get that in front of some different site selectors. And then the final group of properties are kind of just scattered throughout the east part of Evans. So those are our particular properties. And I think I'll just close my comments by saying that, it's important for us, I think, to be aware of just those wide variety of needs, that when we get those site selection requests, to be able to respond to those and know the answer to their questions about how much power can you provide, how much water service can you provide. And we're something that is really critical for them. So
part of Allison's job, I'll just add, is keeping an inventory of those resources and what's available on those properties so that we can respond quickly when those requests comes in.
Yep. So I think that kind of is that in a nutshell. I think at this point I'll pass it along to Rich then and talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure, happy to. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having me tonight, first of all. And since you started with a COVID update, I'll give you just a really quick one. I know you've been briefed on CARES Act funding, which we helped administer, but we have been also administering a Weld County industry relief round of funding. We did just close those applications this weekend. I did a check before I came over here. I can't release the company names yet, but we're estimating we will put out about just over $45,000 to Evans local restaurants through that grant program. So we're happy to do that, and we'll wait and see what happens with the next round of stimulus coming down the pike. Who knows how that will work. But for tonight, I'm here to talk about Upstate and our primary job recruitment. Allison had mentioned primary jobs are essentially designated as companies who are making some type of product that's exported out of the community. Thereby you're generating payroll and investment and jobs into your community, and that money will circulate amongst it, whereas we all love sales tax and we love our restaurants and our retail, but your citizens are spending their money on that. So as a methodology of wealth creation, that's why we tend to concentrate on the primary job sector. That being said, Allison mentioned answering RFIs. We are kind of the agnostic link to these companies. We are there to help promote sites that match their criteria. I do need to make it clear we don't screen them. We do not play favorites. But what we do love to do is work with communities to ensure and make the assets that they have, that are being highlighted, we're able to push those as that kind of perfect match to hopefully land a client into those sites. It is a laborious process. It is not as exciting as some people think, but I kind of do, but I'm strange like that. That being said, it's a tremendous amount of real estate work. It's a tremendous amount of, I noticed you have Ann, your planner, in the back. All of the public works and planning staff are some of the most important people a community can have in landing an economic development prospect. Being able to show that you can get a company into a location quicker than most and have it entitled, annexed, infrastructure. I was really excited. I was driving over here and I saw a little sign that said, this road brought to you by 1% sales tax. That's fantastic, because companies that see communities investing in themselves, they love that. They love that stability, and they love the fact that communities are taking care of their own. So, sorry, that's just an aside. But that being said, at Upstate, as we go through these processes, we also are heavily involved in things like incentive negotiations, a tremendous amount of data work on labor statistics. Any company that's looking to come here, most of them have the same criteria. Give me a site that works for us and a workforce that will work for us. And that means available workforce, and it also means a workforce that has the skills that they need for those particular positions. And so we do a lot of work on that, both with Weld County Workforce Department and regionally, even with Larimer County as well. Because I think you mentioned commuters, and this is very much a commuting region, back and forth in a whole host of sectors. We have a tremendous amount of a lot of different programs. Some of them you're familiar with, like our revolving loan fund, our Bright Futures program, which we're still working to incubate and have it stand on its own. And we appreciate your involvement in that program over the years. But one of the things I'll spend a couple minutes on, we doing okay on time, is our regional work. And so, our task is to promote our communities here in Weld County, but industries do not see a border. Industries do not see, geography in the same sense that communities do. And so we've worked really hard to identify through an initiative called NOCO Ready, the Northern Colorado Regional Economic Development Initiative. We've been doing a lot of data work on cluster studies and really understanding not only what is going on in our core industries like energy, oil and gas, alternative energies, agriculture, food processing, manufacturing, but what are the upcoming industries that we can focus on in terms of growth for diversification. Why do we diversify? Because we need to have a resiliency model in case something goes wrong in the economy. By the way, we started this in 2019. Little did we know. So as we all rushed to do what we needed to do over the past year, halfway through the spring, we're like, oh yeah, don't forget about the cluster study. And so we finally got around to releasing that. But within that now, we're working regionally with all of the economic developers, and Allison's been a great partner in that as well, to enact that growth strategy, to enact that resiliency model. So along with our core industries, we're also focused on the industries that we see growth according to the data, according to the numbers. A lot of times in the world of economic development, you'll see communities and economic developers who will spend a lot of money on ads and say, we live, work, play here. We're the greatest. look at our golf course, look at our nice little microbrewery here. Those are important quality of life things, but companies look at the data, right? And they want to see what their supply chains are. They want to see their transportation routes and how they are going and what the growth of the region is. So we also look at a lot of demographic information as well. That being said, we've got a lot of work to do in areas, and this is one we can talk a lot about. We identified distribution, again, back in 2019 as a potential growth industry. We identified bioscience. We identified additional manufacturing because it's such a core, and what I mean by that is product manufacturing. It is a core industry to pay attention to here in Colorado, particularly northern Colorado, in terms of bandwidth. Plastics of all things, which was kind of a surprise to us. But then, of course, another one you're quite familiar with, food processing, as it relates to agriculture. And the numbers and the RFIs in 2020, we'll put that to the side. The first quarter of 2021, we've seen a dramatic increase in our inquiries in food processing, particularly, and distribution. Why? Because every single person sat at home and ordered online. And we've actually spoken with some folks at places like, Amazon. And, Amazon, when you talk to some of their leadership, they will tell you they're now looking at themselves as a utility. They did that much work in 2020 that is not going to slow down. That kind of work is going to continue. And so as we look at transportation routes and we do all this advocacy on that, we're looking at distribution as a pretty large chunk of growth opportunities in northern Colorado. The other one I would also make mention of, and you are well suited for here, is light industrial. Light industrial has exploded over the past 2 years. It's those smaller footprints, those 5 to 25,000 square foot type shops, service industry. We're used to it here in this area as it relates to oil and gas. That is, I will say, can be problematic because it's cyclical with the industry. And the first thing to go are the sub-suppliers when that industry has trouble like it did in the past year. But if you go to other areas in this region, you will see light industrial booming, small spec buildings going up right and left, and they're filled as fast as they're built. Again, I'm talking about those 5, 12,000, 15,000 kind of subtenants, or they're chopping those buildings up into different for different users, things of that nature. The other thing I would say, again, because I am completely biased to primary job creation, having an asset like Mountain Tracks, I think has tremendous potential as you go forward. We've had some great meetings with the developers over there, and Allison and Jim, and we see tremendous potential to highlight that as an asset. So with that, I'll stop babbling for a minute and see if there's any questions.
Questions of Mr. Warner? Mayor Pro Tem?
Sure, I have a couple questions. So when you're talking about demographics and you're talking about, when industries come into a city, they look at the demographics, they look at the workforce, the employment. Does it, knowing that Evans is pretty much a commuter town, people go outside of Evans to go to work, does that hinder us in getting a lot of these industries to come into Evans to do business? Is because we're just such a large commuting town that we don't have the workforce to employ a larger industrial business?
It's a great question. I would say I don't think so, and here's why. When you look at the commuter patterns, you see just as many people coming into the area to work as you do leaving. What you do have to pay attention to is your housing stock and things of that nature. But I'll give you a concrete example. We cited a project down in Frederick. And when we cited it, it was a expansion from a company in Boulder. And we talked to the leadership there, and they're like, well, everyone's going to be commuting over, and no one's moving. Do you know what the average home price in Boulder is? It's something around $1.4 million. And so we met with the company a couple of months ago and some Frederick officials, and they're like, at least 50% of our workforce lives down the street now. It's great. It's fantastic. So it's a good example, again, if when you can land these kind of companies, you're also migrating people into your community, because I'm not making too much of a generalization, but the shorter the commute, the better for most people, you know, and people will get fed up. And what happens with commuting patterns also is it typically works in concentric circles related to the wage. So you see people are willing to travel farther for higher paying jobs, and we can actually track that depending on what type of company it is.
I guess my other question would be is when we were talking about, like, you know, distribution, like specifically like Amazon and inventory, do we have the inventory in the city to attract a company like Amazon to open up a distribution center? Do we have the, I guess, adequate inventory for more larger industrial companies to come in?
So maybe that was not the best example to tell you in its current format. And what I mean by that is the world of distribution changes rapidly. So do I foresee a 2 million square foot Amazon distribution center plunked down in Evans? Probably not. But, they tend to be along the more major corridors. That being said, I can tell you I was speaking with the national people at Pepsi, as an example. They've completely changed their distribution model. They used to be the same thing. They would build 50, 75, 100,000 square foot facilities. Now they're building 8 to 10, maybe, and that's their footprint. And because what's happened in the world of distribution is almost a real-time distribution model. So everything's changing in that network, which I think creates a tremendous amount of opportunities. And those who predict the next 5 years are those who will win. But what I will tell you is most important in my comments as it relates to that is be ready. Be ready for it. And what that means is when you're talking and eyeing a site, work with that landowner, that developer, to have the answers. You don't even have to have it all done. Just have the answers. Know where the water line is, how much it's going to cost to extend it if necessary, and what the time frame is on that, on your permits. That's a incentive in itself. To have a community that can work fast on a project is an incentive in itself. Because the quicker you can get a company open, you save 30 days on a project timeline, they're making money 30 days earlier. So being able to define those kind of things is what's most important. And just having that kind of access, because the one thing that excludes, we talk about what we say is site selection all the time. It's actually site elimination. And, companies need those answers. So the deal killer in our industry is it depends.
Wow.
How much is that land? It depends. They're done. So, what can you do? Can you fix those utilities? Well, it depends. What's your tap fee? It depends. Doesn't work. So I would just say be ready. And again, it might not be the Amazons of the world, but it could be a smaller distribution facility. It could be a light industrial manufacturer who's creating, and I'll leave you with this, and I really want to emphasize it. We're talking about the world of attraction as it relates to companies. All the numbers bear out. That's 10, 15, in an exaggerated 20% of what economic developers do. Your jobs come from what you already have here. So you can get a small company in that maybe has 5 employees and help them get to 10, help them get to 20. And help them with their supply chains and things of that nature. So sometimes smaller is better, because those companies can grow.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Spear?
Well, talking about distribution centers, and this question is probably more geared towards our city staff here. So Mr. Warner comes and says he's looking for a distribution center area and needs 50 acres. I think that I see it as not only looking at what we have designed and designated as industrial areas already. Are we keeping in mind some of the areas that are maybe inappropriately zoned for something else that would be better zoned for something like this? And for example, the 50 acres by the old wastewater treatment center. I mean, that's a perfect place for a smaller distribution center. But yet I think it's still zoned residential. So are we coming to the table with those type of properties too?
I will start, and then Allison might fill in, because our general message, especially when it comes to the other commercial corridors like Highway 85, is that our city is open to your concepts. What is, let us work with you. I know Allison talks to a lot of the flex industrial brokers and others about Highway 85, that that corridor, while it might be zoned mostly for retail and other commercial uses, we think flex industrial is probably going to be one of the main drivers of the reinvestment of that corridor. And by that, we're thinking of companies that need some office up front and then some storage in the back. Not probably to the extent of the storage that we have now, but it really can bring that investment and also enhance the look and the feel of the corridor. So those are important.
Right.
What else would you?
And I was going to say it depends, but so
It is flex space.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we get projects that are very time specific. With this project, they want to start in the third quarter of 2022. We know that that is a pretty short time frame and probably needs to be something that's more on the shovel-ready side and doesn't need to be zoned. But then there are other projects that we would have that opportunity. So I think that we have to read every proposal carefully, and then we have to say what site makes the most sense. And if it happens to be one that is maybe not,
you keep maps of just vacant land,
Right. Right.
So that we can kind of work from that and then develop those concepts.
What are their priorities, and how can we match up with those priorities?
So to speed things up a little bit, is it possible or plausible that we can come up with a flex zone that would include this, and this, so that we don't have to go through those steps and put somebody on the back burner or turn them away because we're not there yet?
Right.
I think the short answer is yes. I'd like to keep that comment and probably have some more discussion as we work through the master planning process, because I know Ann Johnson and the master plan team is working with that kind of question when we look at that Highway 85 corridor, for instance, is a place where we think we really need to do that. And there will be other parts of town where that can apply.
And then I want to also say thanks for noticing our signs.
That's great. That's great.
Other questions? Go ahead, Allie.
So my question is falls kind of in line with what you just mentioned, Rich, which was the world of attraction. So how or what would Evans have to do in order to be a part of that specific world? Because we can speak about spaces or areas that potentially can draw a specific business. But the thing is, we're not even a part of that conversation yet. So how do we become part of that conversation where someone's actually considering the city of Evans? And then also, I'm going to give you probably 3 questions, so you can take your time. And also, from your experience, so other cities similar to Evans, what have they done, or has the city done something to change the industrial diversity within their city? So what does that look like? And because I think for Evans, we would like to also, in essence, not reinvent the wheel, but in essence, mirror it. Because if it worked out and it was successful for them, let's do it. And then lastly, how can we utilize our relationship with you to better assist us or equip the city to become that attractive city for these industrial businesses or any business within that sector?
All good questions.
And I just want to say that I worked with you before. We worked together with
Yeah.
the Weld Recovery Translation.
Mhm. Oh, yeah,
And we had
absolutely.
a discussion, and
Yep.
Commissioner James introduced us
Mhm.
via email. So
Absolutely.
nice to see you in person.
Yeah, you too. So first of all, I want to say you are in the game. We are representing all of our Weld County communities, and it's about available sites that meet that particular project. So, and we can actually provide a list as follow-up of the sites and the number of times we've submitted them. So that's already ongoing. How you grow as a community as compared to other communities or getting best practices and examples, there's a lot of interpretation there. But what I will tell you is that successful communities, again, start with infrastructure. And it sounds so silly and really, again, unexciting, but you need the water, you need the roads, you need the utilities. So start with that. And if you have that, then you have the ability in terms of creating that process. I'll give you a concrete example of a community that was really, frankly, it was on the outskirts of Boulder and was seen as an agricultural community, and that was Longmont. And what Longmont did is systematically go through, and frankly, they did it through trial and error, but they had champions, they had development champions, so they could do these kind of things. And you can go to Longmont now, and the main streets are named after them. But so they decided that it was really, really important to build a bunch of clean room space because they wanted to go after that industry. And it worked for a little bit, but again, that was cyclical and it didn't work so much. But while they were doing that, they were building out their infrastructure. And they were creating basically not only physical infrastructure, but they were also creating infrastructure in their workforce. Because again, no one could afford to live in Boulder. So what they did is they started accessing the intellectual capital that was living there to create an entrepreneurial community. But they didn't want to do the same thing that Boulder did. So they started something called the Tinker Mill. So they started a maker space because they wanted to attract manufacturers, right? So you have to kind of decide what you want to be. But I would say start with infrastructure and then start with, again, talent recruitment, things of that nature. It's placemaking is what it is and what it's called in a sense. So there's no shortage of different kind of things you should or you can do to help incentivize economic development. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that traditional incentive. Did I answer everything?
You did,
Okay.
yes. And I think now, considering that we have our master plan envisioning process currently ongoing, I think that's one of the questions that you mentioned. The things that we have to work on is really what is our story and what is the plan that we have for Evans and what we want it to look like. And that's currently what we're doing. So, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Councilwoman Castle?
Yeah, just really quickly, and mine's not required right now, but I think that Councilwoman Spears' point, what I would like to understand are what barriers perhaps do we have that could be preventing someone from coming, or if they come with the Baruch assault mentality of I want it now, is there an inability to deliver? On something fantastic, but then miss it because we're not. So I would love to know what those barriers are and how we as a council can.
Do you have any you can think of?
Well, I would just say that's a tremendous reference, first of all.
Oh, thank you.
So I think I want to turn this around the other way. There's such tremendous opportunity here. When you look at some of the growth in other areas and the problem with that growth, to be able to be the community who can potentially address attainable housing, to be able to be the alternative. We are seeing along the Front Range and this is nothing new, but there is very much a situation in terms of you drive to you can buy as it relates to residential as an example. So again, making sure you have the capacities to meet the growth that's going to come to this community, becoming a preferred choice to come to this community. And again, I can't emphasize it enough. To overcome, problems, you have to have diversity. You have to diversity not only in your housing stock, but in your available sites. This isn't, I have made a joke before, but I'm not really going to talk about it, but this is the first time I've ever been to Evans where I haven't had to talk about retail, because that's been the fixation.
Yeah.
Right? And so, economic development, comprehensive economic development is about, creating an environment of that diversity. So having small businesses and supporting them is a critical component. Having retail is a critical component too. No one's, we're not saying that, but being diverse in your portfolio, to be able to bring in, companies that are creating jobs in different methodologies, it's critical. So.
One other comment I would offer, I think two things that we've found to be hurdles that we're all working on. Water is one where many of our sites don't have adequate water, if any, and we don't have what is called water in lieu. We can't sell water to developers as many other communities can. So we work with our EQR base to try to give people the water that they need. And the other is some utilities. One thing Allison's been working on for many months, sitting down with the owners, for instance, of the Stone Gates Industrial Park, and trying to help them, be flexible, help us be, showing our flexibility in how they might be able to develop and make progress on developing out their whole site without having to do the whole site at once. And a lot of that comes down to the utilities that aren't there. So there may be a role for the city at some point, if the economics work out, we think, to help a property owner like that with their utilities, and that's something that's in the works. So we have some of that same issue on the Mountain Tracks property, frankly, that we're working with the owners on now. But those are a couple of the
there is no underestimating the necessity and power of water. It's just, I'm working on a project now. It is a minimum of a $200 million investment and it's an existing company here in Weld, if we can get a few more shares of water. But they can't do it without the water.
Councilmember Neal, anything to add?
No, I think that this council and this staff is fighting very hard to overcome developments and
Councilmember Morton, anything to add? Councilwoman Johnson.
I have to go along the lines what Councilmember Neal said. I think, this council definitely is taking a different approach as, from before. So it's great to hear that. It's like the first time you've heard us speak about, other types of businesses aside from just retail. So that's great to hear. But another thing is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong in this thought process, but I feel like Evans is primed right now for business growth. And the reason I say that is because we're in essence like a canvas. We're a blank canvas. We have space versus our neighbors. I feel there's like an oversaturation of business and they're running out of that space. And I think eventually in time, we are able to then really think about the businesses that we're bringing within Evans and create those environments that we would like to have. And so I think that in a sense would be an enticing thing for us to bring and generate more interest within our city. And let me know if that's kind of something that is a possibility based off that notion.
Absolutely. And I know I've gone over my time, and so I apologize a little bit. But I will tell you, you have, we talk all about infrastructure, but here's the other thing. You have really good leadership in this community to help drive these things. So I know a lot of economic developers. I know a lot of city managers, and there's economic developers and there's city managers, and then there's good ones.
Yeah.
And you got a couple of good ones here. And so, yeah. But
$2. That's how good she is.
Only 3. But and I'm serious though. In having a council and having leadership that is willing to make those decisions to move a community forward, it's critical because there are other communities that don't do that. And so by doing that, you're positioning yourselves for those opportunities. It's not a guarantee. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have the perfect site and it's going to be filled tomorrow, but it at least gets when everyone's on the same page and moving forward with these economic development principles, you can start to really see light at the end of the tunnel and see that change you're talking about.
Awesome. I agree. We have an amazing group of leaders, and we're grateful. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Fred?
Well, we'll also mention this. It was very gratifying to me to have members of the Evans Chamber of Commerce say that they were glad that council members were coming to their meetings and they were trying to help them where in the past, I guess there was a rift between the city and the Evans.
They're a critical part of the process. Absolutely.
Mr. Warner, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Great
Council.
information. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Anytime. Thanks.
Next item on the agenda is the Highway 85 visioning update. Turn it back to you, Jim.
Sure, thanks, Mayor. So back in February of 2019, the council adopted a vision document, a vision for Highway 85, really with the goal of fostering economic redevelopment in the corridor and raising Evans' profile in the area. The work was collaborative and involved a number of meetings with businesses and neighbors in the area. It was facilitated by a consulting team from Muller Engineering. Apologies to Muller. This is a presentation I'll just mention on the record that used most of their slides and still has their logo on the slides. This is entirely our update, not Muller's. So, but I had some trouble with their logo on the slide, so we kept it. But so we also worked with CDOT to make sure that this vision at the time was compatible with CDOT's guidelines and vision and kind of some of the rules for how the highway works. Very important to mention they haven't approved anything, but that will be in the works as we go forward. But I want to just give an update. These slides that I have tonight are different from what's in your packet. I wanted to provide in your packet the actual vision document from 2019. This is a summary tonight, and I'll try to move through the slides pretty quickly. I know that some of the council, some of the current council was part of this process, and some members were not. So please feel free to stop me and ask questions, or we'll certainly have some time at the end, but I'll try to make my way through. So this is a summary of that visioning document and also the status update on where we are with these various initiatives at this time. So the vision statement, this photo is from one of our community meetings held on the corridor. Create a vital, active, and safe corridor gateway to Evans that provides enhanced connectivity between the corridor and surrounding neighborhoods and that strengthens and sustains existing commercial, industrial, civic, and recreational uses. I'll mention a couple of the shorthand terms that we talked about at that time were that connection with the rest of the community, softening the look and the feel of the corridor, thereby really encouraging, if the city can take the first step, encouraging reinvestment by businesses in the corridor. So really boiled down to three strategies. The first was beautification of the corridor. The city's role is to set the table for redevelopment to occur. That involved those three bullets, which we've made some progress on. The first was continue to work on zoning amendments to facilitate property improvements. We did a round of this back in 2019 and updated some of the zoning, the most critical zoning concerns on the corridor. And then our current staff has done some of that over the last year and plans to do a little bit more, particularly regarding drive-through restaurants, to make that an even clearer use in our zoning code within a couple meetings from now. But continue work on zoning amendments, complete storm drainage improvements in partnership with CDOT. That's really been the focus as far as the operational work since this vision was adopted. And as council knows, there's almost $8 million of work that we've been working on now for the past year and a half or so. That's going to take place, going to happen, start construction this summer. But basically when we did this, we heard from CDOT, first thing you guys need to do is take care of that stormwater, because you can't do a lot of this beautification work that you'll see in a minute without addressing those stormwater problems. So those have been in design and are going to be getting underway soon. Complete frontage road access replacements. We've seen some of those happening. Develop a plan for beautification and certain local streets. That's what we'll see in a minute. And then develop concepts for gateway monuments and wayfinding signage. So those are also part of that first strategy. Strategy two, develop and integrate new market rate housing, building on existing strengths, looking where we already have some residential and looking to kind of fill that in and mix up some of the uses there to help that kind of softening effect of how the corridor looks and feels. And then finally, develop specific roles for the areas around the three primary intersections on the corridor. So looking at a little more detail on the beautification project, talked about the stormwater drainage improvements. Those certainly aren't sexy, but those are what's most fundamental and needed there. Landscape sides. That includes trees and shrubs. It'll also require some guardrail as necessary per CDOT's rules. Talked about, you'll see landscaped medians. CDOT requires raised curbs and more raised medians than we currently have. And that's one of the components of the project, but that would affect a lot of change. Uniform fencing where appropriate. ADA curb ramps, bicycle and pedestrian facilities along the east side of the highway. Gateway monuments, wayfinding signage, those signs that kind of point out different attractions in town, might help people to make a decision to turn into the community and get off the highway. And so those are all kind of components of the beautification. This shows one of the posters, and these graphics we currently use when we're out meeting with brokers. Allison has copies of these, and we kind of share what that vision is. I know that our development partners on the Highway 85 corridors that the redevelopment agency is developing have these and use these current graphics and some of this vision to market the corners that we're trying to develop. But this is the high level look at the vision. You can see they had, at the time, we had identified a prototype block. You can see how the landscaping could work there, and that's representative of how it could work along the whole corridor with trees and shrubs, and then some of the median landscaping there too. Looking at what that might look like in a rendering, these are really more compelling than the other drawings. These are what the developers share. But you can see how that might look in practice. This is from 37th Street looking southwest. When those trees could be built out, we have sidewalk and some of those other attractions, some of the shrubbery. This is from 39th Street looking northeast. You see how some of that just could change the kind of look and feel of the corridor. 39th Street looking northwest. Well, that gives you a feel for what that vision could look like if implemented. The cost, cutting to some of the chase here. I want to stress that this has not been designed, but the engineers that were on the team and the landscape architects that were part of the Mueller team were able to give us an idea just based on materials and what they might cost, that for the whole length of the corridor from 31st Street south to 42nd or even to the bridge there, it could cost, and I want to say really order of magnitude, $9.5 million, call it $10 million for all of those improvements that are identified there. You can see, in addition to the beautification, the gateway monuments and the wayfinding signage. This was the cost estimated for the prototype block, 39th Street to 37. At the time, that was chosen really just because it's a discrete block and it's a manageable length of segment. And at the time, council and staff, when we had the conversation, it was as good as any as a planning illustration for what we could do to start. If we were to build out, say, a cross-section of the highway with those improvements, from just those couple blocks could cost about $1.3 million. That's without the entryway markers or some of the other things. Gateway monument concepts. This is what was kind of developed, and the community groups at the time when we had those meetings were shown different concepts. Some of the principles that the designers advised was, we have a little sign that's out there now on the east side of the highway, but it really, to be effective and to look at where these kind of monument signs have been effective, it needs to be larger. It needs to be current. It needs to be landscaped. You need to observe all the CDOT rules, but it needs to be more of a monument. You see in the bullet points there, some flood lighting, irrigation. They really could and should be much more prominent to have that welcome to Evans effect. You can see the recommended at that time locations, one on the north, one on the south. I will tell you that I'm having a hard time even from right here. I think the one on the left is northbound.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just south, I think. You can see the old go-kart there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just north of 42nd. They looked at the specific areas where the city owns land where we could potentially locate these monuments. And then the one on the south would be in that kind of spate of land there just south of the Tri-Point building coming south. So those were recommended, forgive the pun, but they're not set in stone. We could potentially acquire property if we need to, but those were sites that the consultants at the time knew could work for those examples of gateway markers. So that's kind of what that could look like. Wayfinding signage. The photo on the left is is the existing signage. They have a concept sketch of what a newer concept could look like for wayfinding signage. At the time, the council decided, we could make that decision when we got there. It probably wouldn't be the first priority we always have. I think at the time, you guys can certainly change this direction, but we have some wayfinding signage. When we get to this point in the project, we can look at that design and make a decision at that point for wayfinding signage. Strategy 2, develop new market rate housing. Again, the thought at the time was not low income, but market rate housing that could build in some critical mass of people as we build out retail and other sites there along the corridor, other commercial, that it might be useful to build in some residential along the corridor to, again, affect some of that softening and community feel. Keep moving here. We just wanted to show a couple of places, along Highway 85 that have done this. Really, as you think about where else would have the community mass for this, really the next large community down the road is Brighton, and they have over the past couple of decades kind of reinforced some of their newer retail with some residential. You can see those projects. These happen to be between Bridge Street and Bromley in Brighton, and we just wanted to show a few examples of where residential had been built into otherwise more in industrial areas to kind of support some retail. This happens to be just north of that Brighton Pavilion, a very large retail restaurant development with movie theaters and some other restaurants and things like that. You can see some of the industrial behind the residential there. And then this is another example where they've used some residential there. I don't think they've done as much screening or buffering, and we certainly think that that's part of the equation when you look at residential. But anyway, some other communities have used that concept to help with the retail and the feel of the highway. So to recap, those are those three strategies. I didn't talk much about the third one. That's one that we do, I think, need to do some more work on. Right now, as we said in the last work session, we think we need to be open to concepts for commercial development. Eventually, we may get to the point where we want to be a little more specific about what we're looking for at each of the different corners, say 42nd, what the industry types are, 37th, 31st. Right now, we're looking for successful concepts that can move the corridor and our economy forward. But that'll probably be another strategy to focus on in the future. Next steps, and I'll stress these are not currently budgeted and and are not fully council priorities, but that's what we're also looking for tonight. A little moment of background. When we finished this in February of 2019, that spring the council took some of our unanticipated revenue, because we do that budget true-up process in the spring most years, and set aside $400,000 toward the million or 1.3 that might be needed for a prototype block. During the 2020 budget process, we did, as staff recommended, council took the action to strip that out of that general fund allocation. I'm hopeful that as we come back to you in a couple months with results of the 2020 fiscal year, that we might have some revenue to allocate. And I'll tell you, we're talking about this now, but there will be a long list of needs that we have. So, but these are some of the steps that we could take with council's direction if we had some funding. We need to first re-engage CDOT. We need to really get them back at the table and make sure that these steps make sense to the current staff. And as we engage a designer, which would be the next step, that designer is working closely with CDOT to make sure that we're in lockstep with them, and then we'll have a product that CDOT can approve, since it is their highway. We would, with your direction, we'll be engaging that step, very soon. Depending on how long that takes, if it's just a few months and we get that done, I think we could begin design of actual improvements later this year. If the process with CDOT takes longer than that, we could be into the following year when we actually get the design done. Next step could be to construct a pilot project. You saw that segment that was selected. I'm giving a range here because really the council has, a whole lot of control over how much you do. We could do something just to get started, which could be, a couple $100,000 of landscaping and guardrails and things like that without doing raised medians. Or we could take, a half-mile stretch and commit to a much larger amount and try to do some of those raised medians, some of the other more expensive improvements to get a sense for what the whole vision could entail. I think until we really start work with a designer, we're not going to know what some of those cost parameters are or what's possible, and working with CDOT, but that would be a next discussion for council, how much to do with the money that we can afford. Entryway monuments, if we followed the pilot project, we could do that probably the following year, which is why you see the next couple of years. So this is a loose schedule. I wanted to give you an idea of what we're certainly ready to do and engage. We don't have funding budgeted at this point for these projects, but over the next couple of months, we'll have opportunities for council to consider resources and all the needs that we have, and we'd certainly be ready to move on any of this. So I think that concludes my overview, Mayor, and we're glad to listen to your direction and answer any questions.
Thank you. Comments or questions of staff? Mayor Pro Tem Clerk?
Well, I definitely think we need to re-engage CDOT, and we definitely need to do some type of design, whether that's the prototype or however, but we really need to beautify 85, that corridor there. I think one of the biggest things, like as we just heard earlier in the presentation, is investment in your community, investment in your infrastructure. I think that has a lot of potential, but I think just the way it looks is what's driving people from actually wanting to come in there and develop what we would like to see as a concept. So I think if we can re-engage with CDOT, and we need to find a way to get the money to invest in it. I know it's an expensive project, but I think in the long term, it will benefit Evans, because we will get that development in there that we want, and we will get that sales tax. But we're going to have to find, and it will pay for itself in the long run, but we need to find a way to come up with that money to get that done in that corridor, because without that, I don't think we're going to get the development we want there.
Councilwoman Johnson?
I echo what he said, what Pro Tem Clark stated. But I also, yes, I agree that we need to re-engage. I think that we have a huge opportunity with really doing some work on Highway 85. And I think that's an area where we can definitely differentiate ourselves from the other communities surrounding us, because it will create a hard transition between other cities. The reason why, because we know that 85 highway, it looks terrible, for lack of a better word. It doesn't look good. It hasn't been dealt with and who knows how long. There hasn't been any improvement that I know of But if we definitely start the steps to start to definitely engage in that process, and as well create a change to definitely, so when people are traveling 85, because again, it's kind of it's a drive-through highway. People don't stop; they just continue going. And so, if we can start to show, our drive-through vehicles that there is a hard transition, then they'll be more apt to stop. And then eventually we'll draw them through 37, have them stop. But at least if we start the process, then we can then eventually focus on 37 being our stopping point, because that's our main arterial. But I think, yes, I am definitely for this. And I think that our design for our entryway is definitely a place that we need to look at. I think we need to, again, then make these iconic monuments to really, again, set us apart and really dress up our entryways to, again, make those hard transitions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Spear.
Just want to say I have a little bit of, I guess I'm a little bit concerned about sharing the visions that we have there with these mock-ups along the Highway 85, because I think you get some excitement from prospective investors, and then they come to the actual site and see how run down it is, and then decide that this is not the place that they really want to bring their businesses. So I think that it's very important for us to change the image on Highway 85. I also think that we have some available land on 31st Street and Highway 85 that needs to look more appealing to potential businesses, and I think that that's probably where we need to start. As much as we want to start south, if we start where we need to get some property moving, that it would probably be a better thing to do. I was just there a few days ago, and we have homeless camping on there. So we need to, I really think that we need to start with 31st and making everything. The other concern that I have, and it's probably two for the engineer when they get to this planning part, I think that Evans has a little bit of trouble taking care of trees and medians. So maybe we can figure out something else to put in the medians that's further down. But I just wanted to mention that. And also when it comes to engineering, I do think that we need to make it a little bit more traffic friendly from the turning lanes. We have a turning lane right here on 37th Street going onto the highway that is not very well planned out. If you have two people in line, going east to get onto the highway, you cannot utilize that right-hand turn lane. So I think that we need to make it a little bit more traffic friendly in our designs.
Thank you.
Mayor, could
Yes.
I just comment on
Mayor.
council member, the esteemed council member Spear.
It's Mayor and you.
I appreciate your mentioning the 31st Street focus, and I would kind of look to council. I saw a few heads nodding, but that's our recommendation too, since the city has so much investment and we're trying to get things going there. And that's where the stormwater work this summer will be starting. We'll be able to have that done and be able to probably make headway with some of this work there. So if I can just check heads nodding, that's one direction we can take tonight.
To look at 31st
Look
Street
at that
first.
area
Prototypes.
for a prototype section as opposed to 37 to 39.
That's where I would think
where I
we
would
should
think,
go,
yeah.
but I think somebody else brought it up. We have a major homeless problem going on there. I'd hate to beautify something and have it destroyed. I'm not saying they're bad people or anything, but
Right.
we got an issue going on over there. So I think, yes, everybody agrees the north part first.
Yes.
Anyone down in the front row with comments? Councilmember Neal.
Well, I think we've taken a major step forward in trying to do something with the stormwater, because as CDOT pointed out to us, it's been flooding like this for as long as I've been here, almost 50 years. It makes no sense to make improvements for the beautification when the area is going to be flooded. So I think if we can hopefully get a handle on this stormwater situation, that's going to be a big boost. And the other thing is, of course, with CDOT is getting rid of these frontage roads, which has been a thorn in our side for over 16 years since we agreed to do that. So we need to see if we continue to try to do something with that to get it done. You know, and it's because we're trying to get development there, and we want to be working with the developers or the potential occupants of that property to design it the way they want it. That's another big holdup. But hopefully we can get something done. But I think getting the stormwater taken care of is going to be a major step in trying to get CDOT to agree to improve the look of that highway.
Councilwoman Castle, Councilwoman Mortensen.
Yeah, I mean, my mind automatically just goes to financing these projects and really looking at the options we have with TIF and bringing in a developer or development to assist in generating that TIF revenue to help offset the cost. I mean, we're really blessed that it's in a URA and have the ability to do that. So I would really like to look at those options in some detail and make sure that we're leaning in as best as possible to ensure that people understand the mechanism in place so that we really can start to get those blighted areas addressed while leveraging the ability to have that TIF. I think that's my biggest thing.
Councilwoman
Sorry, my
Mortensen.
finance brings up.
I'm all for this. I'm for the plan. I like the timeline. I hope we can speed it up a little bit, but that's finding money.
Yeah.
But I'm with Mayor Pro Tem Clark. I think if we can invest our money in it now, it'll come back to us tenfold in the future. That's what we need to do if we want those businesses on those intersections, is to make it look business friendly. Right now it doesn't. So I'm all for that. Any other comments?
None.
Got enough direction?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next item on the list is 2021 update to city financial policies.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just introduce this item by reminding council that this is definitely considered a best practice for the council, for staff and the council to consider our financial policies every couple of years. I think in this case, it's now our third year, given that we had a big diversion in 2020. This was one of the projects that didn't quite happen in 2020, but we know it's important.
Yeah, right.
The Finance Committee reviewed these policies in a little more detail in their meeting a week ago and recommended approval to the council. And I think I'll ask Jackie to give an overview of the financial policies. You'll note that there aren't too many changes, but the ones that are, I know she spent some time just making sure that our policies are consistent with state and federal grant requirements and other things like that. So take it away, Jackie.
That I did. Thank you for the introduction. So the financial policies really are important as a guiding document for us to ensure that we're receiving, safeguarding, and distributing the city's money appropriately. And as Jim mentioned, they are in compliance with state guidelines. We've had our investment advisor also look at that investment section, which I think is important to ensure that we have that most appropriate language built in as well. And not a ton of changes in this version this year. We did last approve them March of 2018, so not too far off the schedule there with this 3-year rotation we're trying to hold. I did include a few bullet points in the staff report highlighting some of the major changes in this version. As you recall, we had a separate surplus property disposal policy that I felt was necessary to kind of bring this in and help that be more of a usable document. So any of those levels to kind of help guide staff in what they need to do if there is an item needing to be disposed of is followed properly. We've updated both simplified acquisition and micro purchase threshold guidelines that are related to grant purchasing. So if we ever found ourselves in a natural disaster again, hopefully the language in this is helpful enough that we would know what to do to start out purchasing and keep us out of trouble there. One of the major changes is updating the general fund reserve policy to coincide with council's last direction. So if you don't remember, about a year ago in looking at fund balance for the general fund, it was decided that instead of holding a 40% level of prior year operating expenditures, that should be a 50% level. The main driving force behind that is increasing the sudden economic downturn factor that we know is so important. And, we were happy this year to look at our financials and not know what we were facing, knowing that we had robust reserve policy in place. So that did bring that up from 15% to 25%, thus driving 50% overall fund balance reserve. The last bullet point in the staff report is a change to director level approval of purchasing authority, if you will. And prior to this draft, I think since 2012, we had put in a chart in this policy, I think it's on page 14, that gave some direction to staff as far as when department directors would need to approve contracts versus when it would need to go to city manager versus when it would need to come to city council for approval. Also giving direction to when we would require written quotes be received or when full RFPs needed to be completed as well. We're not recommending any changes to getting quotes or doing RFPs, so those will still come to council as they have been. And the only change then is director level approval going from 10,000 to 25,000. So what that means on a staff perspective is if I have a $13,000 professional service contract, it's within my budget, it's something I need to do and an approved project overall, I can sign that purchase order and direct that work to begin without having to have that go across Jim's desk and maybe clog up what you need to approve in that level. So what I handed out, Finance Committee, when we talked about this last week, had asked a good question about really what kind of items fall into that threshold, what that would maybe really mean. So we did just pull what you have in front of you as just a purchase order register. So it's purchase orders issued in 2020 between that level, 10,000 to 25,000. You'll see there's 81 purchase orders on here. So these are an example of the types of items that would not have to be approved by Jim and rather that department director would.
Think of all the time.
All the time. I think accounts payable told me that of all the purchase orders Jim approved last year, making this change would cut the number he has to approve in half.
Whoa.
So he was very excited.
And just to underline there, this wouldn't change my accountability, my authority level to you. This is within my authority. This is just that director level authority. So.
Absolutely. So that's one of the more notable changes. You'll notice if you looked through the red line version, just some cleanup of language of responsibilities of department directors or city manager, assistant city managers, just trying to make sure our language is as close to accurate and how we're actually doing things today.
Can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
And I don't have the red line. I'm not in the middle of that, but it's the vendor selection. I know
yeah, we talked about
council has had a couple of questions, and we had said that we would kind of beef up the language and make that a little more specific about our vendor qualification, or I guess acceptance and disqualification is also important. So you might touch on that.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. And we did talk about that in Finance Committee as well. On page 15, it gives some indication of how our vendor selection is to take place. We did reach out to state procurement to get some specific language that they use in their guidance as well to make sure we're mirroring that and staying consistent. And really what we did was add to what defines a responsible vendor. So we have responsive and responsible in our current policies, meaning you've had to have met the deadlines, you've had to have answered all the questions and provided all the information that we have asked of you in maybe an RFP or whatever. And then responsible goes further to allow us to really check references, look at past history, look at the financial capacity or staff capacity to make sure that they can satisfactorily perform the project that the city is asking of them. And then that gives city staff the ability, or city council then, to strike out a bid or not award a contract if one of those items isn't met satisfactorily. Did I answer your question on that?
Mhm.
I think it gives a little bit more ability for staff to do that additional digging and really recommend to city council a good vendor for projects.
That concludes our presentation.
Questions of staff or comments?
Makes sense. Thanks.
I have none. I'm on finance.
What?
I'm on finance. I've already grilled them.
Anyone?
I don't have any. I appreciate the finance committee. I appreciate you, Jackie, and everyone that assisted. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Council discussion, anyone have anything to talk about for a minute or two?
I do. I wanted to talk about the ERA fund. It's there's an ERA fund with Weld County right now. There were granted, I think it was 1.9 million to help with rental assistance. So there is a criteria in place, but it helps with any debt due to not paying your rent from, I believe it's March 13th forward. So right now they're not doing future payments, but they have the capacity just to assist moving forward. And so it's definitely something that we should try to, let people know about, because especially right now with the pandemic, a lot of communities and residents are facing, unfortunately, that type of scenario where they're not able to pay their rent. So I think it's definitely an amazing resource, and it's only rent. But if there is a constituent that you have, or resident, or whomever that you're approached, and they need mortgage assistance, Neighbor to Neighbor, they're a company in Fort Collins. They assist with mortgage assistance. So in essence, Neighbor to Neighbor has they have more funding when it comes to that, but they only assist Weld County with that aspect, because Weld now has the ERA fund. But they're able to assist people with their mortgages, with their debt, any arrears that they have, and also future payments. So it's just a resource to let people know about, especially right now. Right now, the income threshold, it's a pretty decent one. So I feel as though most people within Evans are eligible for it. But again, it's just something I would like for everyone to know.
Yeah, thank you.
On that note, that information can also be shared with landlords, because people as landlords can get that information to their tenants and help them with all those programs as well. So, for example, the DOLA program, as a landlord, we can give the form to the tenants, they fill it out, bring it to us, and we apply for the help for them. I haven't had one get denied yet. So there's also that program, but landlords can help with that too. And that's something that I don't think all of them know.
Yes, and it's actually a more advantageous way to go about it, because landlords, when they apply for that, they know who is in need, and they're able to reach out to their tenants to assist them with that. And not only that, it's a collaboration between the tenant and the landlord to be able to acquire these funds. So in essence, it's a win-win situation. So the landlord is also assisted financially in that sense, because they're able to receive these monies that they weren't receiving.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Neal.
Well, I issued my polar plunge challenge again this year, and I haven't been able to find where we can sign up for city council on the website, but Brian said he'd send me the link. But I will do the same thing as I said a year ago. If everybody will donate 1 month's worth of salary, I will double my donation. And if they will all get sprayed down by the Evans Fire Department, I will match all their donations for a total of $28,000 or $2,800.
When is the date of that, Fred?
17th, I think.
It's March 27th, it was
27th.
Saturday.
Oh,
Council has their own date.
yeah.
Oh, we have our own
council
day.
has
Oh, yeah,
their
that's
own
the
date.
Windsor.
The Windsor one.
Yes,
The-
so
the
Windsor
Council
one-
is the 17th.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Is that a Wednesday?
No, I don't believe so.
That is a Wednesday. March
It's not the 17th. What does it say on that?
Okay,
sign?
that's fine. Like, is that a Wednesday? I was like, okay.
We'll find out the date, but we do have a council thing on there. There is money being raised. The police department has a section. City council has a section. We're raising a lot of good money for a great, great, great cause. So
I've donated
please
already.
share.
Sorry,
It's on
it's so
Facebook. I know Allie shared it and donated to it. So
And I'll
raise
get
some good money for
sprayed.
some good kids.
Fred, Councilmember Neal, I'll get sprayed this time around. So, just so you know.
It was cold last year. I'm not gonna lie. That was cold.
this year. I sat out last year because I don't like to be submerged in water, but if they're spraying me, I'll
I'm
do
with
it.
you. Yes.
I'll do it.
Cool. Anyone else?
It's a good
I'll
time.
match anybody that wants to join the fire department and run through the Windsor Lake.
Great, thanks.
Awesome,
All right,
thank
we'll
you.
take one, as soon as you're ready, let us know. Take a 1-minute break.
What are these?